The most controversial thing I've ever written, there are many to choose from, I think. And I'm often surprised by the reactions of the audience and the readers, because when you write something, it isn't necessarily read the way that you intended it to be received or to be interpreted or processed. So no matter how many caveats and explicit points that I make that some particular finding is interesting, but it's still speculative and it demands more research, I think a lot of times I'm seen as an advocate of some particular theoretical model. So I can choose from any number of things in terms of pissing people off and making people upset. I mean, one thing that comes immediately to mind is I wrote a paper, I read an article for Slate magazine that was dealing with the evolution of rape and sexual coercion. Now, in evolutionary psychology and also anthropologically, there are lots of researchers that are doing research on the ancestral history of human sexuality and have come to the conclusion that at least somewhat frequently, women would have been sexually coerced, and this would have been a biologically adaptive tactic for reproductive success for males, particularly subordinate males that wouldn't have any other way to propagate their genes. So it's not, so the evolutionary history of rape or the natural history of rape is not a terribly controversial issue within the evolutionary communities, but when you put out a argument like that or a theoretical model that says that rape perhaps is natural or has an evolutionary history in our species, I think a lot of people misinterpret that as the author, me in this case, or the researchers who are doing this work, saying that males have absolutely no control over their behavior, that this is a behavioral trait that is evolved and therefore it's inescapable and it should be an excuse to allow males to do what they would in terms of their interactions with women. But I think that's a major mistake. I think that we can't understand human sexual dynamics without taking into consideration the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years of phylogenetic history, where under certain circumstances, things that were not terribly desirable, things that were absolutely abhorrent, then just as they are now, occurred, and they actually could have led to reproductive success. So the interest of the gene is completely orthogonal or separate or independent from the well-being of the individual who's affected or who's actually engaging in this particular behavior. So, so that's one example where I've made the argument that, that women might have evolved counter adaptations to male sexual coercion or rape, and sort of drawing from that particular literature. And a lot of women get, and men for that matter as well, get very upset with that type of discussion because I think that they automatically assume that there's some sort of a deterministic factor involved with this and men have no control over their behavior, which is absolutely not true. We have to understand the science to make significant changes in human behavior.